Zach Aldridge and Brandon Baylor here with the Morning Buzz. We'll talk Carlos Correa heading to the Mets a little bit later in the show, but we start with some sad news in the NFL. Hall of Famer and legendary running back Franco Harris died last night at the age of 72.
Yeah, this just days before the 50th anniversary of the Immaculate Reception there. Harris, a household name not just for Pittsburgh, but across the league, played for the Steelers from 1972 to 1983, was famous for that incredible play that won the Steelers their first playoff game almost 50 years ago to this date here. The four-time Super Bowl champion and nine-time Pro Bowler was drafted by the Steelers with the 13th overall pick, if you remember, back in 1972. Coming from Penn State and coached by Joe Paterno during that time, his storied NFL career, rushed for over 12,000 yards. By the way, he's still the leading rusher in team history, also having been named the MVP of Super Bowl IX. He was set to have that number 32 jersey retired. By the way, the Steelers only have two other Hall of Famers that have had their jerseys retired, in Ernie Stotner and Joe Green. He would have been the third. That ceremony would happen on Saturday. But Harris, of course, extending beyond the Immaculate Reception there. A household name, as I mentioned, for the Steelers. You see it when it comes to the numbers. A 1990 Hall of Famer inductee. Something to say about him. He was just one of those guys, even when he retired, impacted the league. And yes, we talk about the reception, but a greater man there for the Steelers organization. I want to welcome in Scott Pioli with more on this, and Franco Harris, of course, looking at his legacy, a member of the Steelers Hall of Fame and Hall of Honor there, a name that rings bells in the organization. Can you share what he kind of meant to that franchise for me?
Oh, at that point in time, he was a game changer for the organization. If you remember, the Steelers were a really bad football team up until they drafted Franco. They were just starting to turn the corner and get some good players in Terry Bradshaw and Joe Green and L.C. Greenwood, some of these other players. But when Franco burst onto the scene in 1972 when he was drafted, he was a part of changing that franchise. That's the year that the Immaculate Reception happened in the divisional round of the playoffs. But it wasn't just Franco's ability and his skills. Obviously a great player at Penn State. He came to that team, and it was a team that did a great job of bringing the right kind of people together, to bring championship people together. And Franco was at the head of that class. And, you know, guys, I've got to say this, I'm 57 years old. So when this play happened and Franco became a star player in the league in 1972, I'm 7 years old. And those are years, very formative years when you're a young kid and becoming a fan of a sport, football in particular, and to see those teams and to see the Pittsburgh Steelers and Franco Harris, as you mentioned, it wasn't just his ability, it wasn't just the things that he did on the field. We talk about the Immaculate Reception, we talk about all of his accolades, but Franco Harris was an absolute gentleman that stood for all of the right things and all of the right values for someone who became a real hero to people.
And Scott, we had a chance to speak off camera. You've had a chance to interact with a human being outside of the football player. What was he like? His personality? We can see it sometimes. Of course, we saw it there, the Hall of Fame speech, the smile, the charisma there. But what was he like as a person for you?
Well, here's again, I didn't get to know him very well, but here's what I do know. It was, again, when you're someone who works in this profession and you're spending your days and nights around professional football players, you have this tendency to not be wowed or awed when you meet, when you're spending time around people, including great football players. But I'll never forget the first time I met Frank. I was working for the Cleveland Browns it was the early mid-90s, and we had a game in Pittsburgh. And he was on the field, and there was a group of people he was with that I was meeting, and I met him, and it was his grace and how gracious he was. He was thoughtful, he was engaging, but more than just engaging, he didn't make you feel like this was him just shaking hands and kissing babies. His eye contact, his ability to focus on the conversation in that short time, which was the first time, and there were several times after that, was just unique to me, because again, guys like Franco, there's people that end up in those situations, end up being the stars that they are, and they just, they're, again, it's part of the car wash that they have to go through. But he was engaged in the conversation, and I just remember how gracious he was as a person. The conversation went on for a little bit, and then the next time we saw one another, he had remembered meeting and part of the conversation. And again, one of these people that even though he had become a star and a celebrity, he knew who he was and he remembered people that he had met. So again, it's truly a sad day for football for so many reasons, and of course for Franco's family.
Scott, you just mentioned something a few minutes ago. You were 70 years old when the Immaculate Reception there happened there. I'm curious because take me back to that moment. What did that mean to the NFL? Because we didn't have social media. We didn't have the Twitter, the Instagram to kind of check this all out. You could imagine, I mean, fans were just in awe. And this is the only video we have. But take me back to that moment there when he became that star, as we all mentioned.
Well, here's the thing. I go back to 1972. I remember we saw, my dad and I saw this game on TV. We were at a friend's house. We didn't have a color TV. So the images you're seeing right now, seeing in color, that was part of what wowed me, was having not seen football games in color. But we were at a friend's house and seeing this, and I remember this game, but you didn't have the ability to have as many reruns of it, right? Because now on social media, you see something will get 1 million hits, 2 million hits. You saw it live, and then, after a week or so, then highlights started to trickle out. You would see the initial replay on the news, but again, the New York News wasn't carrying the divisional playoffs as that important an item in Pittsburgh, in a game between Pittsburgh and the Raiders. Again, we had the Giants and the Jets, who in 1972 were both awful. So there wasn't a lot of attention being paid. But it's fascinating how many times we've seen that since through social media. Even though it's an event that happened 50 years ago, social media has certainly grabbed it and caught it up to speed.
Something we'll remember, of course, long, long past both of our times there. And when we think about the younger generations, because he finished up in '83, that was 6 years before I was born. So, in honesty, it was a long time ago. But if you're looking at the younger generations, how would you want them to kind of remember his legacy when it comes to terms of Franco Harris?
Well, I would say this to the younger generation. And by the way, in 1983, that was my senior year of high school going into college. So, I get there's a little bit of a difference there, but here's what I'd say is he wasn't a good player, he was a great player. More than that, he was an absolute gentleman who used his career, his success, and his platform not to just elevate him, but to elevate so many other people. And you can be a great champion, you can be a great player and a great human being. He comes from, again, a time where we need people to match their record off the field that they had on the field. And Franco did that. That's how he should be remembered. Again, here's a guy, he owned a women's football team. He has been a changer for so many people, and that's, to me, how he should be remembered.
Appreciate it, Scott Pioli, stepping in on this breaking news, the passing there of Franco Harris at the age of 72. Appreciate your time as always, Scott. Of course, he's not just a Hall of Famer, of course, a great human being, as Scott mentioned there, one of those guys that you will remember. And I even joked there that, he finished his career 6 years before I was born. You and I were even a thought of.
Right, exactly.
But we still hear his name in 2022. Of course, for the reception there, something that is iconic when you look at the film. But on top of that, the person he was after the Hall of Fame speech, we all remember, of course, the person he was not just to the younger running backs as the Jerome Bettises of the world, the Najee Harris, what he meant to the organization and the city of Pittsburgh.
I think it's interesting to see how he's able to stand the test of time.
Yes.
From that play alone to then seeing how good of a player he was. That's one thing that I certainly learned growing up. Like, you see the play, but then you realize, wow, he was a Hall of Famer. He was very, very good. It's wonderful to hear the stories about how good of a person he was off the field as well. We got a glimpse of that at that 1990 Hall of Fame speech, and we'll play some of that for you right now.
Is the Army here, huh? Oh, it feels wonderful. It's been a long time. It feels wonderful. Oh, that brings back great memories.